Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Delta X podcast with Ellen Shu. These are conversations with changemakers, innovators, and self-starters who have made their mark on the world at a young age, breaking down the journeys of those who are changing the status quo and building the future today. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And welcome back to Delta X Podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Shu, and today we have with us Krithik Ramesh. Krithik won the 2019 Gordon E. Moore Award when he was 16. And if you don't know what this award is, it was actually the highest award at ISEF, or the International Science and Engineering Fair. And for me, since I have been participating in ISEF for 2 years, I know how big of a deal this is. It's a really huge thing because there's like millions of students who participate in science fairs. And so Krithik, with his research on developing a lifetime navigation system for spinal reconstruction using AR and ML, was able to get the top award at ISEF. Back when I was in person. I'm still a little bit salty about that, but that's okay. But as well as being interested in machine learning, medicine, and engineering, he also started a nonprofit called Empowering Rural India Foundation, which provides sustainable energy solutions to impoverished schools. So welcome, Krithik.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Super excited to be talking about science fairs, your research, and overall just your interest in like computational biology as well as ML and engineering.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's just jump back 2 years to 2019. So back when you were in ISEF, walk us through that experience. What was it like when you heard that you made it to ISEF and also just participating in ISEF in general?
Yeah, sure. So I think actually I'd have to take it even like 1 year previously too. So the year before was the year before I won in 2018 was the first year that I'd actually qualified for ISEF. And back then I was actually doing like computational fluid dynamics research. So like understanding fluid structure interactions and seeing how like fluids flow over like a wing. So my project back then was like understanding surface pressures and like how something called limit cycle oscillations occurred on a wing. So like how can we prevent turbulence on commercial aviation aircrafts? So I spent a lot of time working on there. And like the first time that I got to go to ISEF was like one of the most eye-opening experiences I've ever had. I went to a very competitive high school that like focused a lot on research. So I was, acclimated to this like research involved environment. But for the first time when you go to ISEF is when you really get to see people from all over the world and like the kinds of either the resources and the creativity that was implied or like required to do the research that they've done. And it's like truly phenomenal. And whether that's in like animal sciences or computational biology or like even like electrical engineering, all of these kids have done like really impressive work and have shown, they demonstrated a lot of creativity. And I think one of the coolest things that like ISEF in general sort of promotes is this idea of collaboration and like getting to meet other similarly motivated individuals.
For sure.
Like, even if you work in like labs or stuff, you're surrounded by people that are like, in most cases, twice, if not more than that, older than you, right? So there's this generational disconnect of like what it truly means to be a researcher when you're like 15, 16, 17. And when you go to ISEF is the first time that you get to see people that are very similar in age to you. And it's really cathartic and you meet a lot of cool people. You get to do all sorts of mixers and meet with Nobel laureates and see what like the pinnacle of their culmination of research ends up with, and how even competing at ISEF or even attempting to is sort of a testament to where you can be in like a decade's time.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. When I went to, it was virtual this year, but this year at ISEF, I was like, I didn't know these types of people existed. It made me so happy just to figure out that there's so many people who are researching all different types of things and utilizing their own like unique skill sets and apply that to such like meaningful and huge problems. So how was like the judging like?
A lot of people ask me about this. So I think it's fundamentally, for me, I think I went about judging a lot differently than most people. And that just comes from like me generally being a laid back person. So like I don't take it seriously. So I'm just like here for whatever. I'm just here for the ride. A lot of people at ISEF judges are generally required to either be PhDs or industry experts when they're in your category. And then when you fill out your form, you even get the luxury of choosing a subcategory. So if you choose like biomedical engineering, in my case, I also got the subcategory of choosing radiology. So the people that you get to interact with are very knowledgeable. And I saw that more of a privilege, and like the level of scrutiny that they provide is not only beneficial, but also like really refreshing. So like a lot of ISEF kids, like especially when we make it, we get a lot of congratulations and like a lot of like, low level feedback. But when we get to talk to people like this, I thought personally as an interaction of more of like a conversation with someone that's deeply educated in this field than someone that's like scrutinizing and judging my project to see whoever wins like X amount of money. So like a lot of those doctors and radiologists and surgeons provided feedback to me where they were like, look, like we really like this, so how would this be used like clinically? And then like if I have an answer for that, I get to like actively explain it or like show like future steps I wanted to take. And in the cases that I didn't have answers to questions, it was more of like, oh, okay, this would be interesting for like whether I'm continuing this or publishing this research. This was like substantial. And it's exhausting. You spend 8 hours and you're standing there and you're just kind of waiting, and you do this thing where like the science fair documentary on Disney Plus is like pretty accurate about this
I watched
too.
that.
Yeah, it's like if you haven't been in person, hopefully you'll get to go next year and actually like experience it. But the aisle walk of like looking at other people's projects in your categories and like sizing them up a little bit, or like trying to figure out how like can you even read like pronounce some of the things on their board, and like all of these like little things, like because even if it is a convention, at the end of the day, like it is a contest to see how other people are doing. So you get to you have this like little bit of intimidation where you see like other people get judges and like, whoa, like what's going on? And like that was the experience my first ISEF. And then second time around, I was just like, look, I'm just here to enjoy it, and like whatever comes of it comes of it. So I remember texting my parents after like 8 hours of judging and being like, I think it went horribly. And I was like, I was very particular about it being not my best one. In 2018, I thought I did really well, and like it worked out, and I got first in engineering mechanics, and I was like, oh, wow, that was really cool. And then this year I was like, I don't think I impressed anyone, or like I don't know if I saw the ramifications of my research, like and like my HoloLens died before the lunch break. So it like simply stopped working. So I spent all of lunch like running diagnostics, and I ran over to there's this thing called the Intel Hub. That's what it used to be called. I'm assuming it'll be called the Regeneron Hub now. But I ran over there, got an extension cord, got my computer, and then ran diagnostics to get it running right before judges came back. So it was this super intense like thing where I was like, okay, nothing is going right this whole time. But at the end of the day, I mean, like it worked out and I was fortunate enough that it did, but those 8 hours are probably when I learned most about my project instead of like the 6 or 8 months that I spent actually working on it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess like the feedback, like especially like you mentioned with the industry experts and really being in your niche as well, and then providing that super hardcore, like authentic feedback. I love how authentic it is. Like they kind of get right to the point. Like these are the things that would not work in a real setting. And it kind of is like a reality check as well.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we take for granted as like researchers, is that obviously like I think a responsibility is twofold. The first part is like the namesake, you're conducting research. But the second part is being an effective communicator of science. And when you realistically have like 10, 15 minutes to explain your project, all of its nuances, and answer all of their questions, you have to be incredibly succinct and effective at explaining things. And that's just like, it's definitely a skill, but like handling it more like a conversation than a presentation definitely helped me.
That's good to know as well. Like if you treat it like a conversation, one thing someone told me, I think it might've been my mom or someone, was like, if you just, all you have to do is you get there and you show them why you care so much about your project. And that's really like, if they communicate how much you care about it, just like if you're talking to someone who's like extremely knowledgeable, but don't know anything about your project, how would you carry that over? Like your passion, like why this matters so much.
Yeah, enthusiasm is definitely like, usually it's a demonstration of thoroughness as well. Because if being interested in something is easy for like the first 15 seconds. And then every second after that is trying to figure out like, okay, what about like this tangential like edge case, or like what happens if
Mm.
like XYZ? And like the other thing is like everyone at ISEF, generally speaking, like in judging is like equally as passionate about the subject and want to see you succeed. So
Uh-huh.
they hear a lot of those commonalities and like see your pitfalls as well, which is why that feedback is so like foundational.
For sure. But yeah, I know you mentioned you had a HoloLens in your project. I've read your abstract and know a bit about it, but for first-time listeners who may not know that much about your project, how would you explain it?
Okay, sure. So I think the best way that I explain it to people is like, think of it like Iron Man's helmet. So the HoloLens itself is like, it shows up in augmented reality, which is like a
Mhm.
relatively, a lot of people have heard of VR, which is like virtual reality. So you have like an entirely different environment that like sits in front of your face. And like I think
Mhm.
my HoloLens is like I have my like my Oculus somewhere here, and that's like a VR headset. So this was the
Oh, wow.
original version. So it was way
Uh-huh.
older. It was not as like powerful, and like that like obscures your real world. Augmented
Mhm.
reality is a fusion of these two things. So it shows up like a three-dimensional hologram of something, and then you can also see your real world. So a lot of the reason why I went about this was, well, twofold. So one, like the one that I explained and like the one that people like most generally know me for is like playing
Uh-huh.
Just, because I was playing Just Dance with my Connect, and like I was terrible at like Shakira's Hips Don't Lie. So I was on this like quest of like superstarring all of these songs, right? So I was hell bent on trying to figure this out. And essentially, instead of trying to get better at dancing, which was like entirely out of the cards for me, I was trying to figure out how like the Kinect sensor worked. So like if I understood what was going on, I could probably leverage that to get a higher score.
Mhm.
So essentially what I figured out is that it was predicting like your biomechanics of where you were positionally using two sensors. And incidentally, what ends up happening is that I realized that you can use that exact sensor array for some sort of prediction methodology.
Mm.
And a lot of robotics do this right now as well. It's called simultaneous localization and mapping, otherwise known as SLAM. So fun little acronym. So essentially what
Mhm.
it does is like if you put a robot in an unknown environment and then you just let it like use its sensors and like go back and forth, it'll eventually be able to stitch together the environment that it's in. So this is pretty substantial because that means that like you can give it with a priori knowledge, you can actually develop geographically and spatially accurate maps. So I
Mm.
was like, how can we use this for something that's like more medically involved? Because I was like a huge Grey's Anatomy fan. So I was like just
Oh,
starting
uh-huh.
medicine. And what I realized was that the current methodology that we use for like placing screws in people's spines was something called fluoroscopy, which is like essentially a movie x-ray. So
Mhm.
it shows you have this patient open, and then this x-ray goes over, and then you can see as you put in needles through like subcutaneous fat, like nerves and things, and even bones. And like x-rays are the lowest like fidelity images that you can get like inside of a human body, apart from like an ultrasound. So like
Mhm.
you don't get too much degrees of information. So when you think about it, your spine's pretty complex, and there's like a lot of nerves and ganglions and things that go through it. So when
Yeah.
a surgeon is placing screws in your spines and they're not looking in at the patient and they're looking at a two-dimensional screen of an x-ray, it doesn't provide a lot of confidence. And like clinically,
Mhm.
the results show like the pitfalls of this, where like there are a substantial number of revision surgeries, or like we call them oozy holes, where essentially like because they're minimally invasive, we only make the holes where the area of the region of that spine is. So what ends up
Mhm.
happening is that like when you do revision surgeries, you have to make more of those holes. So then it looks like someone like oozied you, or and there are a lot of substantial limitations, and like we've been trying to overcome these issues and like predicting how vertebrae actually behave when forces are applied to them. So
Mhm.
essentially what I ended up doing was developing these machine learning, like an ensemble of machine learning models that could actually predict spine biomechanics when forces were applied to them. And once I was able to actually validate that, when you reconstruct these and then use that like simultaneous localization and mapping algorithm, you can
Mhm.
fix that 3D holographic spine with the optimal screw trajectories over a patient's back. So now you have full 3D visual assessment using MRI scans, which are higher fidelity, with
Mhm.
vascularization and like the nerve endings. And you can see it in front of the actual patient with the screws in 3D. So it provides an exponentially higher amount of visual acuity for a surgeon, and it also reduces radiation exposure for the patient and the surgical team.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the whole point of my project. But the short way that I explained it is like I think my friend made a joke about it too, is like Pokemon Go for spinal surgery.
You want to go over spinal surgery. I love that. Yeah, and I love how you went from like Just Dance to like spinal
Yeah, like, it's
surgery.
just like one of the things that I try to like I advocate for very heavily is that like when you go to ISEF and you see all these projects, you're like, whoa, I don't even know what C elegans are. Like, whoa, I don't even know what half of these words mean. Like,
Mhm.
what is principal component analysis? Like T-stochastic neighbor embedding. But the the inspiration of like how you start or go about things can come from literally anywhere. Like Velcro came from like some like weird plant sticking to this scientist's dog, and he looked at it under a microscope and he's like, whoa, if you like replicate these shapes, you can create like semi-adhesive structures.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
right? So like all of these, like a lot of human innovation in general is by accident.
Mm.
So like there should like a lot, there's a lot of stigma or like some sort of like false preconception that like research is done exclusively in a lab, and like understanding that like you were looking at a microscope and you were like, you figured out everything. It's more
Mhm.
like, okay, I was doing something random, or like I accidentally tripped and fell, or like my dog got stuck in a thorn bush and now we have, right? So like this is like this sort of like democratization of like ideas.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I remember, I don't know if this is true or not, but like the microwave too, wasn't it because like his chocolate bar melted in
Yeah,
front
yeah.
of
It's
it?
commercialized by like Raytheon. Like, so this guy was working at Raytheon, right? And he used
Mhm.
to bring like a chocolate bar because of like his kids or whatever that he just used to give at the end of the day. And then he realized that like these chocolate bars were melting out of nowhere. And he's like, wait, microwaves.
My
He's like, what if we make this something commercial that people can put popcorn in? And that's
Mhm.
microwaves.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting how like it can really start from anywhere, and specifically for your case too, like Just Dance. Like who would have known that there's so much that actually goes into that. And yeah, Just Dance is a lot of fun too. So it's great how you're able to have fun. Also, this like also spiraled down into a really cool research project.
Exactly. I think like that's like one of the beauties of working as a researcher in general, is that like we say that art imitates life, right? Like art is
Mm,
a representation of our real world life. But if we're a
mhm,
researcher, I think we have this like distinct privilege of being able to say that like life imitates art, because we take these two seemingly unrelated concepts and then
mhm,
quantify them using some sort of metric and realize that there's like substantial similarities between them, which like otherwise wouldn't have seen if we didn't take the opportunity to smell it, like
uh-huh.
actually look into it. So I had this like saying like being a researcher is like, and like something I stand by is like stopping and smelling the roses, but also analyzing the color saturation.
I love that. I love that. So you're enjoying it and you're really like taking a look into
It's
the how it actually works. So it's like observing but also, like having fun and
exactly,
enjoying the journey.
quantification can show like internal beauty.
Mhm. And I know you mentioned, you don't have to work in a lab, right? And so specifically in your case, you're working on some pretty complex and like high learning curve research. How are you able to do that by yourself as like a high schooler without all
Yeah,
these complicated materials and lab equipment?
no, that's a totally fair question. I think one thing, and like a lot of people say this, but I think it needs more contextualization. They'll be like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
online courses like provide all the information you need or whatever. But
Uh-huh.
yes, they do. And a lot of the knowledge that I have is from like taking, so I took like 3 Stanford machine learning courses before I started this. So I had like some sort of understanding of like how machine learning, deep learning, and
Mhm.
like computer vision worked. And that provided a lot of substantial context. But online school helps substantially with like contextualizing things, because you get to see um, like you'll like learn something and then you get to apply it. So I had the luxury of like taking these classes and then building like a basic, is it a cat or is it not a cat, like machine learning classifier. Like
Uh-huh.
it's so trivial. It's like obviously you could do it yourself, but learning the ability to like actually create a machine learning classifier is so substantial. And
Mhm.
then And once you're able to learn and read and like have a foundational understanding of things, applied and higher level heuristics make sense. So like let's just take whatever I was doing, for example, right? You
Uh-huh.
don't need to know the Krebs cycle to understand like spinal behavior, but it would be useful to understand spinal anatomy, like a
Mhm.
little bit of neurology, how nerves work. Because when you think about it, a surgeon, if they look at the complications, they have to have that foundational understanding to be like, okay, wait, if this person has like numbness in their left arm and like they've been pushing weights and you look at the MRI, you can be like, okay, there's like pinching in like the spinal cord and like near the spinal ganglion. And like, how
Mhm.
can we fix this using corrective surgeries? So taking that same sort of foundational approach and then applying them out and like extrapolation is like what was really substantial for me. And working in a lab may provide that kind of experience with like the experience of a mentor, but this is something that generally, even if it takes longer, is possible individually.
Got it. So like taking the courses, but then also building something kind of trivial, but also helping you cement that knowledge.
Exactly, exactly.
That's really interesting. And also, I know you worked with a lot of really cool technology like ML or like AR in your project. In terms of actually seeing that being used in medical settings or being used in our daily lives, do you have like a guess or like a timeline as to when we might see this? Because these are really awesome things.
Right. So it's really interesting, right? So
Uh-huh.
there's like this I would say like this very implicit war between the FDA and like all machine learning engineers. So
Uh-huh.
and like it's understandable and there's a lot of reasons for why this is the case. So I think the best way to describe this is a machine learning, or like at its most simple term, is a mathematical representation of a human neuron and like how if certain criteria are met, a neuron fires, right? And then we
Mhm.
learn features as a byproduct of this at like an exponentially larger scale.
Uh-huh.
We
Yeah.
don't fully understand how machine learning works. Like we literally input data in some randomized fashion and it tends to learn better than if it's linearly given or like if it's like or in than like even other randomized methods. And
Mhm.
the same thing is true for medicine, right? If the pandemic has taught us anything, we obviously don't have all the answers in medicine. Like it's abundantly clear. So somehow, when we take some mathematical representation of something and like a computer science application that we don't fully understand, and take
Mhm.
medicine, which is the field we don't fully understand, and put them together, we get our greatest insights into this field, which doesn't necessarily make sense.
Uh-huh.
So when we do drug discovery, and like this is one of the most like probably the best explanation of this is like we spend upwards of decades working on drugs before they become commonly available.
Mhm.
Like new machine learning methods, like there's this one called generative tensorial reinforcement learning, or gentler, and it's able to develop different kinds of structural drug models that are actually possible. Or like whatever
Wow.
AlphaFold has developed, which is like you just put in like the text, like just the chemical composition in text for a molecule, and it can construct it in 3D with all
Mhm.
the residues, which is unbelievable and cuts down on like instead of drugs taking 10 years, it could take like only 2 to 3, right? But
Wow.
the regulatory institutions or like the regulatory infrastructure doesn't exist for us to say like this machine learning model could hypothetically be implemented into an FDA drug approval pipeline or like a
Mhm.
clinical trial. With how like not antiquated but like strict that FDA requirements are, or for like just health in general, there's sort of
Mhm.
this conflict between the speed that machine learning can offer and the regulations required for something to be safe. So like in the next 10 years, we can probably start seeing like early level implementations of like diagnostic medicine with machine learning, but like
Mhm.
to like full level clinical applications is going to be probably quite a few ways out. And like I understand that's like a little bit pessimistic, especially as someone that like actively works on making these models that like are supposed to be hyper accurate and work super well, but
Uh-huh.
the limitations are substantial and like they often get overlooked.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I know there's also a lot of like, bias in these data sets. And like as you mentioned, like the machine learning algorithms, they still can't fully explain why they're making certain predictions, why they're doing certain things. And I was reading something the other day about like we don't actually like the logical theory behind how like the high level features and low level features in the neurons are represented are actually not actually how it works. So it's a lot more like the unintuitive explanation is usually the right one when it comes to these models.
Exactly. Like I think one of the like this is what you've touched on is a very important part of medical applications, like machine learning in general, is that like the first like machine learning is statistics, a little bit of linear algebra, and computer science. And like the first rule of statistics is garbage in, garbage out. And I think one of the most important things that gets overlooked so quickly is the kind of data that we feed into our machine learning models. So a lot of people will be like, yeah, my machine learning model got like 95+% accuracy on like detecting something or other. And then when you look at a lot of these data sets, they aren't like heterogeneously mixed with like different features of like geographical locations, epigenetic factors, like gender distributions, ages. All of these play a substantial factor in like being able to make assessments. Because if you look at, let's just say a really common case, like Alzheimer's, it's one of the most prevalent neurodegenerative diseases in the world. And like I'm pretty sure the most prevalent in the United States. Women are 2/3 more likely to have Alzheimer's than men. So and like the way that the initial diagnostic systems are presented are fundamentally different. So, and that goes for a lot of cases, like also heart attacks. Like for what we mostly associate with like heart attacks in men is like heartache, like chest pain, tightness, shortness of breath. And like a lot of those symptoms aren't necessarily represented by women when they have like myocardial infarctions or like series events leading up to that. So when we develop these machine learning models, taking into account what kind of data goes in is really important. And data curation and like production is very expensive. So we're sort of at this like threshold where we need to be able to create more data either artificially while still preserving a lot of those features. And like there's plenty of papers about generative adversarial networks that are able to create their own like photorealistic MRI scans, and then we can use that as data. But they all have their limitations. So if you think about the legal system in general, if it's already disproportionately biased against racial minorities, and we're starting to use artificial intelligence to sort of help with the data curation and like collection process for trials, we're only exacerbating a situation that we've spent like if the past like year and a half of like activism has shown anything, we are dismantling like years of institutional bias. And it takes a lot of work, and everyone needs to be on the same side. So if we start implementing systems that immediately start counteracting it and then sort of revert to previous systems, the ramifications are huge. And like it goes overlooked.
Yeah. I've also heard of a similar incidents with like Airbnb trying to fairly establish house prices, and that was also biased towards non people of color, and like their house prices would just be so much higher, and like they'd be making more money from like the rentals, and then people were struggling with getting that. So yeah, I definitely see like how the bias can be very exacerbated, especially when deployed into the real world and when it's actually dealing with like people's lives in medicine or like people's like justice in terms of like court and stuff like that as well. And yeah, routing back towards data, right? I think it's also really interesting how you talked about like the garbage in, garbage out. And also since like, you know, neural nets are like based off of the brain, and as humans, we have so much like, I don't want to say infinite, but there's like tons of data. We get like sensory data, like experiences, everything that we can intake from our environment. There's so much of that data, and our brain is like really good at that. But yeah, what do you think is like the way forward for like ML or AI in terms of how we can be less biased? Yeah.
That's a really good question. So I think there's like a couple of different things that have been relatively useful. So one thing, like just from like a computer vision perspective, that was like really cool is that OpenAI had this thing called like microscope, where you can see what each of the individual activation functions visualization looked like, which I think is like, while it may not like immediately show you what you're expecting, at least it gives you a little bit of insight into what's actually going on. And a lot of the research that OpenAI does is like understanding how machine learning works and how we can sort of fix the inconsistencies that we see. Like one of the biggest things, like as a researcher, that you can do now is just look at your data set, and then when you write your machine learning papers, like clearly state limitations. Because and I think a lot of like media about science, like science journalism in general, has sort of like chalked up machine learning to be this like hyper godly, like it can solve anything, it can solve like world problems
It's gonna take over the world.
yeah, exactly. Or like artificial general intelligence like take over the world. But there are substantial limitations. Like AlphaZero is one of the best chess playing, like it learned the entire composition of human chess history in 4 hours and then surpass it, but it can't play checkers. Like there are limitations, right? Like and these get like sort of swept under the carpet and like, nah, don't worry about that. But like you should worry about that. It's like, where does your algorithm fall short and how can you fix it? And by and large, it's just that machine learning is a data science game. And like, that's like, we obviously know like how much data, how valuable data is, and like how companies like Facebook and Google are actively going out of their way to see how much information they can get out of you. Right?
Yeah.
So like, and when you're doing research, you don't have that same like investment capital, but what you can do is like publish papers that show where we can show room for improvements and like what current models are lacking.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really valuable to like criticize or be your own like criticizer of your research, and just understand that, you know, if it does look like it's unbiased, chances are it's probably is, and you should go back and take a look.
Yeah, exactly. It's that self-governance. I mean, that's why we have like peer review processes, but even then, like things commonly get overlooked.
In general, do you think AI is going to be like overall a force of good, and, you know, helping people out with a bunch of different applications? Or there's also that apocalyptic point of view, which I see it being propagated on media a lot, you know, where it's like AI is going to be super biased. It's going to achieve this sort of godly state of being able to understand humans better than we know ourselves, which could be possible as well if you look at it in terms of deterministic perspective. But yeah, wondering what your view is, especially for like the near future, as to whether AI is going to be a force of good or not.
No. That's fair question. I think the best thing that I try to like explain to people is that machine learning isn't supposed to replace you, by and large. A lot of skilled labor, like Amazon in their factories has like these robots that go around and they can pick up stuff, but they're all in these nooks and crannies, and like they're not organized in an intuitive way. They're like things that are commonly bought together or put together, and sometimes it'll be like baby diapers and like baby formula, but they obviously aren't immediately correlated by shapes and sizes. So Amazon workers have to work hand in hand with these robots, because like sometimes they're hidden or occluded from the vision of the robot. So there's like this paired understanding between these two, and there's like a relational thing that exists. And for a lot of skilled work, whether that's being a pilot or a doctor, your experience and 15, 16, 17, 18, like nearly 2 decades worth of experience can't be coded immediately into translation. So a lot of AI and machine learning is supposed to be a diagnostic aid for preventing errors, where if you can make assessments and there's a difference of opinion between you and the assessment that's being made, ultimately your experience will prevail. There were like certain instances of skin cancer assessments where like the machine learning model corrected that it was melanoma when the dermatologist didn't. But if that's the case, it's super easy for that person to do a lab assessment and then actually do a culture of that skin to make sure that it's in melanoma. So ultimately, we've caught something that previously wouldn't have been caught. And if they say that something isn't something, but the doctor obviously identifies it to be true, again, that same verification process exists because of your experience. So I realistically see it being more of an aid than something that's like replacing people's jobs and like taking over the world.
Definitely. Yeah, I see there's like a lot of value in human in the loop systems, and especially where you can have like if the ML model is like uncertain, be able to default to a doctor is also really important. You know, you're not really taking away from anyone's value in terms of both sides, but you're just like adding it together and seeing how AI and humans can work together best. Yeah, and I know we talked about a lot from bias and how ML can change the medical workforce, but also a bunch of different other areas. I guess to finish off the podcast, let's route back towards the very beginning, towards science fair, right? So after science fair, I know it's been a few years now. What have you been working on, and what really gets you excited today?
Yeah. So I think the most recent thing that I've worked on, and I'll probably be publishing soon, is that I worked on a series of machine learning models to predict the gene interactions that are involved in congenital heart disease. So a lot of the gene interactions at like the fetal stage are relatively unknown, and like maternal medicine in general is not as highly researched as it should be, because it's one of the complicated specialties you can go into. So applying machine learning to this definitely gives us a lot of insights. So essentially, the way that I went about it was that this machine learning model determines gene interactions the same way that like Instagram suggests friends to you. So Instagram knows who you follow and like roughly categorizes people. So like if you go to a certain high school and you follow a lot of people from this high school, they have like the geographical location for that. And then there's another person from another high school that also is following similar people. So like they also follow Michael Phelps. So they also follow the Team USA Olympic team on Instagram or whatever. And you happen to be following each other. Instagram is able to generally make this assessment that like you and your friend know each other through either a swim meet or like some sort of swim vocational aspect. And like you're from whatever the case may be. So while it doesn't know the exact specifics, it has a general understanding of how these two minute things are contributing to an overall global factor. So if we use that for the same thing of like genetic pathways, we can start to see how like specific protein interactions occur, or like how genetic expressions happen through the gestational period. And then what I'm able to do is then take all of this data, relate it to ultrasound data, and then actually reconstruct 3D hearts of fetuses after development to make cardiac assessments before they're born, to see whether like interventional cardiac surgery is required, or we can wait postpartum to see, and then do like neonatal surgery.
Wow, that's really important, and I definitely see like why it, like as you mentioned, it's not really a well-researched area, and how something like this could be super helpful. But yeah, super exciting how you've been able to take like your interest in medicine and like ML and engineering from your science fair in high school all the way to what you're working on now.
Thanks. Yeah, it's super fun.
Thanks so much for coming on. It was really awesome hearing about, your perspective from your own research, and also how you view that the world's going to be changing with all these different technologies in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And for all the listeners, hopefully you enjoyed and took something new out of this podcast. Check the show notes for any resources, and also a newsletter which you can subscribe to keep up with future episodes. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Delta X Podcast with Ellen Shu. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.